The courtroom goes silent when the judge looks up and asks one question that no one in the Brown family was prepared to answer. Which wife was legally abandoned, and who helped cover it up? In that moment, Kody doesn't look at the judge. He looks at Robyn. And Christine realizes this case was never just about marriage, but about control. If you think you know the sister-wife story, stay with me and tell me in the comments right now, who do you think is hiding the biggest secret? The courtroom doesn't erupt in chaos or shouting when the case begins. It sinks into a tense, unnatural quiet, broken only by the scrape of chairs and the judge's calm voice. And in that silence, everything the Brown family spent decades hiding suddenly feels exposed, with Kody sitting rigid and defensive, Robyn twisting a tissue she hasn't used, Meri staring straight ahead as if bracing for impact, Janelle watching everything with quiet calculation, and Christine appearing almost unsettlingly calm. The kind of calm that only comes after a final decision has already been made. The judge doesn't frame this as a religious debate or a reality TV spectacle, but as a serious civil case involving emotional abandonment, financial imbalance, and years of silent dependency. And as Christine's attorney speaks in a measured, almost gentle tone, it becomes clear this isn't about one wife leaving, but about patterns, promises made, resources controlled, affection rationed, and voices dismissed under the protection of family unity, while Kody shifts uncomfortably. Because for the first time, those patterns are stripped of emotion and laid out like evidence, not accusations. And when the attorney reveals that financial records, property decisions, and private communications will be entered into the court record, the air changes completely. Meri stiffens, Janelle exhales slowly, and Robyn lowers her gaze as if she already knows what might surface. And this is the moment viewers realize the case isn't about divorce, it's about power. Because when the judge leans forward and calmly asks whether the court will see proof of unequal treatment among the wives, Christine's attorney answers yes without hesitation, causing a silence so heavy it feels physical. And as the judge warns that once evidence is entered, it becomes public and permanent, Kody avoids Christine's eyes on the way out, focused straight ahead like someone already preparing a defense, while Christine pauses at the doorway for just a second before stepping forward, steady and resolved. Because what's coming next isn't an argument, it's testimony. And if you're watching this unfold, ask yourself in the comments right now, when the records finally come out, which wife do you think benefits the most? And which one paid the real price? Christine doesn't rush to the stand when her name is called. She stands slowly, smoothing her hands against her skirt, breathing in once as if to steady not fear but memory. And the courtroom watches closely, because this is the moment everyone has been waiting for. The moment where speculation ends and testimony begins, and when she raises her right hand to swear the oath, her voice is clear, not shaking, not angry, just firm. The kind of firmness built over years of swallowing words she was told would rock the family. And as she sits, she doesn't look at Kody at first. She looks at the judge, explaining calmly how plural marriage was never supposed to mean emotional isolation, how love was promised equally, even if time never was, and how, over the years, she learned to measure her worth by silence. Because speaking up always came with consequences, subtle at first, canceled, plans, colder conversations, doors that closed emotionally long before they ever did physically, and this is where the story stops being about TV drama and starts feeling uncomfortably real. Because Christine describes nights spent waiting for calls that never came, family meetings where decisions were already made, and the slow realization that loyalty was expected but rarely returned, and when the judge asks her to explain abandonment in her own words, she doesn't dramatize it. She says abandonment wasn't Kody leaving the house. It was him leaving the marriage while still expecting obedience, still expecting support, still expecting her to smile for the cameras. And Kody shifts in his seat as she speaks, jaw tightening, eyes darting briefly toward Robyn before returning to the table. And Christine finally turns her head and looks at him. Not with anger, but with something heavier, disappointment mixed with clarity, and she recounts one specific moment when she asked for help emotionally and was told she was being dramatic. A moment that sounds small until she explains it was the night she realized her pain had become inconvenient. And right here is where many viewers realize the marriage didn't end suddenly. It ended quietly, piece by piece. And as her attorney guides her through financial dependence, Christine explains how shared resources were discussed as family money, yet decisions about property and spending slowly stopped including her, how she trusted the structure because questioning it felt like betrayal, and when asked if she ever benefited disproportionately, she answers no without hesitation, then pauses and adds that she didn't want to benefit more. She just wanted fairness, a word that hangs in the air longer than expected, and the defense objects briefly. But the judge allows her to continue, and Christine's voice softens as she describes the pressure to maintain unity publicly while privately feeling erased. And when the judge asks how that affected her decision to leave, Christine answers that leaving wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of survival. And Robyn dabs her eyes again, this time slower, as if deciding whether tears will help or hurt, while Meri stares down at the table, expression unreadable. And Janelle watches Christine with a look that suggests recognition rather than surprise, because what Christine is saying sounds less like blame and more like a long overdue truth. And as the testimony nears its end, the judge asks one final question. Did anyone attempt to stop her from leaving once she made her decision? And Christine hesitates just long enough to matter before answering yes, explaining that promises were suddenly offered, conversations reopened, but only after she no longer needed them, and the courtroom goes still again as the weight of that timing sinks in. And when Christine steps down from the stand, she doesn't look back. Not because she's afraid to, but because she doesn't need to anymore. And if you think this testimony only changes how you see Christine, stay with me, because the next witness is about to change how everyone sees the family itself. So before we move on, I want to ask you directly in the comments, when someone finally speaks after years of silence, do you believe them more? Or do you question why they waited so long? Janelle takes the stand without ceremony. No dramatic pause, no visible nerves, just a thick folder placed gently on the table as if she's setting down something she's carried for years. And the courtroom senses immediately that her testimony will feel different. Less emotional, more surgical. Because Janelle doesn't speak in metaphors, she speaks in numbers, timelines, and quiet confirmations, explaining that for most of the marriage, she was the one tracking expenses, balancing family needs, and trusting that shared meant shared in practice, not just in language. And as she walks the court through property purchases, rental decisions, and money transfers, her voice stays steady even as the implications grow heavier, revealing that some wives were consistently informed while others were consistently expected to adapt afterward. And this is where the tension sharpens because facts don't argue back. And when Janelle explains how funds moved without group discussion, how assets ended up tied to only certain names, and how questioning those decisions was often framed as disloyalty rather than responsibility, Kody leans back in his chair with crossed arms while Robyn's posture tightens almost imperceptibly, And the judge begins asking clarifying questions that sound neutral but land like pressure, prompting Janelle to clarify that no one explicitly said you don't get a say, yet the outcome was the same, repeated often enough to become normal. And when she's asked whether she ever raised concerns, Janelle admits she did, quietly, respectfully, and that those concerns were usually met with reassurances that never materialized. And right here, viewers realize this isn't about one dramatic betrayal, but about a system that rewarded silence and punished persistence. And as she opens the folder and references one specific transaction, a transfer tied to a property decision she says she never approved, the courtroom seems to lean forward collectively. Because this is the first moment something tangible, undeniable, and documented enters the story. And even Meri looks up sharply now, eyes flicking between Janelle and the judge, while Robyn stares straight ahead as if movement itself could draw attention. And when the defense tries to frame the situation as misunderstanding rather than exclusion, Janelle doesn't argue. She simply states that misunderstanding doesn't happen the same way over and over again. And the judge nods, slightly making a note. And this is the moment where emotion gives way to credibility. Because Janelle explains that her breaking point wasn't anger or jealousy, but realization. The realization that independence had slowly replaced partnership without her consent. And when she's asked whether she believes this imbalance affected Christine as well, Janelle pauses, choosing her words carefully before saying yes. Not because Christine asked for special treatment, but because she stopped expecting fairness altogether. And that answer hangs in the air longer than anyone expects. And as Janelle steps down, she closes the folder but doesn't take it with her, leaving it on the table like a promise that more is coming. And if you think this case is still about feelings versus facts, stay with me. Because the next testimony forces someone to answer questions they've avoided for years. So I want to know from you in the comments, when money tells a different story than words, which one do you trust? Robyn's name echoes through the courtroom. And for the first time all day, the energy shifts from controlled tension to visible discomfort. Because unlike Christine's calm resolve or Janelle's quiet precision, Robyn approaches the stand with hesitation written into every step. Her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands clasped together as if holding something fragile, and when she's sworn in, her voice is soft, almost fragile, immediately drawing sympathy from some and skepticism from others. And she begins by saying she never intended to cause harm, never asked to be favored, never wanted division, repeating variations of those phrases as if hoping one of them will stick. But the judge listens closely, allowing her to speak, allowing the story to unfold. And as Robyn explains that she trusted Kody to manage decisions for the good of the family, the words sound familiar, almost rehearsed, until Christine's attorney gently asks whether trust removes responsibility. And this is where the room tightens, because the question isn't accusatory. It's unavoidable. And Robyn hesitates, eyes flicking briefly toward Kody before returning to the judge. And that single glance says more than her answer ever could, because she admits she knew certain decisions were made without full group discussion, but believed it wasn't her place to interfere. A statement that lands differently now that Janelle's documents sit openly on the table. And when asked whether she benefited from those decisions, Robyn's voice cracks as she insists benefit was never her intention, that she was just trying to protect her children, protect stability, protect peace, and for a moment the courtroom feels split between empathy and doubt, because intention doesn't erase impact. And the judge leans forward slightly, asking her directly if she was aware that other wives felt excluded or financially vulnerable as a result of those arrangements, and Robyn pauses longer than anyone else has so far, long enough that the silence becomes part of the testimony. And when she finally answers that she suspected there were feelings, but didn't realize the extent, Meri exhales sharply without meaning to, drawing a few glances her way, and Christine keeps her eyes forward, expression unreadable, while Kody shifts again, irritation creeping into his posture as Robyn's uncertainty chips away at the unified front he's tried to maintain. And when Robyn is shown a timeline, dates aligning property decisions with moments when Christine and Janelle were already emotionally distant, her composure wavers further, tears finally forming as she insists she didn't ask for more. She just accepted what was given, and this is where viewers feel the emotional collision between victimhood and accountability. Because accepting without questioning still changes outcomes. And the judge asks one final yes or no question that cuts through the emotion like a blade. Did Robyn ever speak up on behalf of the other wives when decisions favored her household? And Robyn opens her mouth, closes it, swallows, and finally answers no. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want to risk destabilizing her own marriage. And the honesty of that answer ripples through the room in ways no accusation ever could. And as she steps down from the stand, eyes red, voice barely audible, the courtroom feels heavier than before. Because now, the narrative isn't about villains and victims. It's about choices made in fear. And just as everyone begins to process what that admission really means, the judge announces a brief recess before the next phase, hinting that Kody himself will soon be required to respond directly. So before we go any further, I want to ask you in the comments, when staying silent protects you but hurts others, is that self-preservation or betrayal? Kody finally takes the stand with a confidence that feels practiced rather than natural, shoulder-squared, voice firm, as if volume alone can restore authority, and he begins by framing himself as a man overwhelmed by responsibility, insisting he tried to balance love, leadership, and logistics in a family structure no one else truly understands. But the judge doesn't interrupt, and that silence unsettles him. Because when he explains decisions as necessary and centralized for efficiency, Christine's attorney calmly introduces contradictions, dates that don't align, statements that shift, explanations that change depending on who was present, and Kody's cadence falters just enough to notice. And this is where the mask slips, because consistency is the one thing authority can't fake. And when he's asked why some households receive stability while others were told to wait, he leans into justification, saying patience was a virtue he expected from all wives equally. Yet Janelle's documents remain open on the table like a quiet rebuttal, and the judge presses him on communication, asking whether dissent was welcomed or discouraged, and Kody bristles, reframing criticism as negativity, loyalty as compliance, unity as agreement. And right here, viewers realize control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like redefining the rules. And when Robyn's earlier testimony is referenced, Kody tries to shield her, claiming full responsibility. But the attempt backfires as the judge points out that leadership without transparency still creates harm. And Kody's jaw tightens as he's asked a simple, devastating question. Did he ever prioritize one marriage to preserve his own comfort? And for the first time, he doesn't answer immediately, glancing toward Robyn, then away, then back to the judge, finally saying he did what he thought was best at the time. And that phrase lands hard, because it explains everything without excusing anything. And as the testimony continues, his contradictions stack quietly, not dramatically, not explosively, until authority gives way to defensiveness. And when he steps down from the stand, the courtroom doesn't feel resolved. It feels clarified. Because Power no longer sits at the center where it used to. It's scattered among truths finally spoken. And if you've stayed with me this far, this is the moment. You ask yourself whether leadership survives accountability. So before the next phase unfolds, tell me in the comments, when control is challenged by truth, does it adapt or does it collapse?